can tell us a little bit about your brother. I reached out to the Teslers to see if they'd be interested in sponsoring this series, and they actually, I think it was in honor of their anniversary, which is around this time, and they said they were interested, but they would rather sponsor it in memory of Eli. So while we're waiting for some people to log on, why don't you share with us a little bit about it?
All right. Well, Eli was 55 years young when he was niftar, taken from us too early. Unfortunately, died from cancer. He was professionally, he was a neurologist, and that was just one of his, tremendous list of skill sets. He was a professional balkore. He wrote a sefer. While he was in medical school, he wrote a sefer on Kriya for Bali Kriya because he had so much free time on his hands. While he was in medical school, he took time to do a master's in biomedical engineering as well. So he had diverse interests, and as he matured in life, he got much more involved in the ideas of the nature of, as we say, I'm in Israel, and he made Aliyah also, and Marabu Masecha Hashem, like how awesome are your creations, God. And he was fascinated by the convergence of science, nature, theology, and how this all hones in together with a true feeling and a true emunah of people who understand, trying to understand God's world. And he wrote a book on this as well. He was just very, very, very involved in thinking about things in a very deep way. But he was also he was a mensch. Bottom line, he was loved by many people, and people came from Shiva and afterwards with stories of how he just came and helped numerous people, both professionally and both unofficially. He was involved in issues of cognition, specifically when people are going through dementia, cognitive testing. So he set up a startup company doing cognitive testing. So he was involved in many, many, many areas, many disciplines. But I knew him as my big brother. He was 14 months older than me, and we had a very, very special relationship. I made Aliyah in '88, so I've been in Israel for quite a while, and he came, I think, 14 years ago. So a little bit after me, but still he's been in Israel for quite a while. And he was a practicing neurologist at Echolov Hospital, Saruski Medical Center. And then he set up his startup company, and he was running with that for quite a while. And unfortunately, he got ill, and everything went very, very quickly. In under 6 months from diagnosis, and we were convinced that we were on the road to recovery, when literally things turned on a dime, and the doctors said, no, we didn't get it, and it's aggressive. And within 72 hours, we made a U-turn from thinking we're on complete recovery to a downward spiral that was fatal. So at least Hashem was merciful that my brother didn't have to suffer, and he left this world with a lot of dignity, and his loved ones were around him. And the giant tragedies, my parents had to, unfortunately, bury a son, which is like the worst thing possible. But I think I went on a bit about that.
No, well, thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate it very much. And I see that Avi Tesler is on. Thank you, Avi and Tali for sponsoring. I don't know, Avi, your connection to Eli. Do you want to tell us briefly about that?
The connection to Eli has been as a result initially of business engagements. Eli has been a founder of several technology companies. The first one that made us work together and starting with work and continuing with some beautiful friendship between ourselves has been a company by the name of Neuro Trucks that has been measuring patients, mostly older people, for dementia and Alzheimer, the ability to measure their state of mind in order to allow the caregiver to offer them a proper way of living their life as well as possible despite of these clinical cognitive issues. And it started as a business engagement and very quickly evolved into a good close friendship. Eli has been a scholar, has been a very interesting, smart, deep thinker about wide range of different things that go in life in general. And more than all, he was a very good person, very good heart, cold heart that really cared on how to help society and how to care for his family. So we are honored to have Eli associated with this shiur and limud opportunity.
Well, so are we, and thank you so much to you, Avi, and to Tali for sponsoring. I'd like to welcome everybody to this three-part series, which, okay, I was in a happy mood. I'd like to welcome everyone to this three-part series. I'm going to mute everybody, and then I will unmute Rabbi Rosensweig when it's time to start. And I'm just going to briefly introduce Rabbi Rosensweig. Before doing that, again, this is a three-part series. This week, next week, and the week after on Halacha and mental health. Today's topic is integrating Halacha and mental health concerns. Our speaker for the three lectures is Rabbi Yoni Rosensweig, who is the rabbi of Netzach Menashe community in Beit Shemesh. And he is a well-known teacher of Halacha, Gemara, and Jewish thought. For 3 years, he was the Rosh Kollel of the Mizrahi community in Melbourne. He headed Yeshivat HaNiftar, and then became Rosh Yeshiva Yeshivat Shavut Yisrael in Efrat. He currently teaches in Midrashet Lindenbaum. Rosensweig has smicha from Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovich, and from the chief rabbi, I should say Zatzal, and from the chief rabbinate of Israel. And he has degrees in education, philosophy, and history. He is the author of a 3-volume collection of Shelot Uchuvot Responsa called Yishrei Lev. I am a proud owner of that set, and also of Sichot Baruach, Conversations in the Wind, or in essence, which are imagined dialogue. It's a Hebrew book, but if you could understand the Hebrew, it's really fascinating. Imagined dialogue with great Jewish thinkers of the past, where Rav Rosensweig poses conceptual, theoretical questions to them, and has conversations and assumes what their answer would be based on their writings and what we know of them. The idea for this class came from me following Rav Rosensweig on Facebook. I know that he is writing, hopefully soon to be publishing, a book on mental health in Halacha, and I thought, why not give my Kehillah a head start on some of the ideas that Rav Rosensweig has been working on. Rav Rosensweig and I have also corresponded on some issues of halacha related to my shul and Corona. I think Rav Rosensweig was the first person I messaged when we first understood how serious it was, and we were worried about Purim, if you remember that. That seemed like 1,000 years ago. And we were wondering about Purim and Zoom and what to do about Purim. And I sent a Facebook message to him. Anyway, I'm going to unmute you now, Rav Rosensweig, and welcome you to United Orthodox Synagogues. We can't have you here in person, unfortunately, but this is the next best. And we'll hear from you now for a little bit, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. I'm going to, again, everyone is muted. If you have a question, I think we'll wait till the end for questions, but when it comes to the question time, you could use the raise hand function, or you could wave on the screen, literally raise your hand, and we'll figure out a way to get your question in. Okay.
I have a question quickly. A question quickly. Our time is till about 9 o'clock, like my time, 9 o'clock. Your time, 1 o'clock, I assume?
Yeah, about an hour, yeah.
Okay, that's with the questions and everything, yeah?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Rabbi Gelman. And I also got to hear a little bit about Dr. Eli, right? Not Ellie, Eli Simon. who these shurim are in memory of, and I heard some really nice things. So, I'm really happy that shurim could be in memory of such a special person. We're going to talk today about integrating halacha and mental health. We're going to talk about halacha and mental health in general in the next three times that we have together. There's a lot to discuss, of course. But today, what we're going to do is I'm going to give a short introduction about how I got into this whole topic because it's relevant to what I'm going to talk about today. It's important to realize that halacha and mental health have not intersected for a very long time. It's not that the rabbis were unaware of mental health issues. They were, but like most of the world, they weren't aware of, let's call it the nuance with which we have to tackle mental health. Because if I use non-politically correct terms for a moment, okay, when people are just crazy, right, or nuts, or they do things that are out there, so we can all see that, right? We can all see if someone, starts speaking in ways that are completely not in correlation with reality. We can see when someone is acting in a way or seeing or claiming that he sees things or hears things that no one else can see or hear, if he's delusional. We can see when a person acts in a way that is irrational. We can see all those things if they're very, very clear in very extreme cases. But things that are less extreme, like let's call it a light depression or OCD, okay, which could easily be misunderstood as scrupulosity, as someone being extra machmer, someone who says Shema and decides he wants to say Shema again and again and again because he's not sure that he had the right kavana the first time, right? That person may simply have a form of OCD, but to someone who is not familiar with that term, he might just say, wow, that person he really cares about his tefillah. He really cares about his Shema. He really just wants to do the right thing. He wants to have kavanah in the right places. So we look at that and we may think that it's a positive thing, but actually we're talking about something very negative. My point is that seeing the things that are obviously at odds with what we would consider normal society, that's easy. But to see the things that are more complex, that is difficult. And until I would say, lately, 50 years, 100 years, we didn't know about that even outside of religion. We weren't aware of those things to the extent that we're aware of them today. Didn't have names for them in the way that we have today. And so a halachic response to them was also not something that we really have. So when you look at the halachic data, right, from the Gemara and the Rishonim, like I said, until about 100 years ago, you don't find much. You find mostly the concept of what we call a shote. A shote is someone who, to put it simply, is probably more closer to psychosis than neurosis. So people who are psychotic, who have psychotic issues, those individuals are, on one very extreme side of the scale. But most, I think most people, I think that's right to say, most people are not there, are not in that place. Most people, when they suffer from mental issues, mental illnesses or disorders, those things are lighter. They're not usually all the way to that extreme. And so as a result of that, a proper halachic response to those things is non-existent almost. And I am a rabbi of a community, and when I was approached at the beginning, right, of my tenure here in Beit Shemesh with questions about halacha and mental health, I had nowhere to turn to. But it's not just me. I know of many individuals who say, oh, we get asked all the time. We don't know where to look. And this may surprise all of you here to learn, but there is no book. I'm not saying there isn't an article here and there. I'm not saying there isn't a book that mentions here and there halachic solutions. But we're talking about 5, let's say, or 6 cases that are discussed, right? What about all the other ones? Perhaps you know a book like Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata. There's a book about Hilchot Shabbos, right? If someone wanted to know the halacha for a certain Shabbos question, they could easily open up that book or other books that are written similar to it. Where you have it gives you the bottom line in a very clear way about different questions that a person may have. You want to know if you can make, mayonnaise on Shabbos. You want to know if you can make this or that on Shabbos. You want to know if you can, tie a shoe on Shabbat. What kind of ties can you do? All those questions have answers. What about physical health? Those questions have answers too, right? Certain procedures are to be done on Shabbat or to be done at all. Yes or no? Different kinds of things have to do with that. Once again, there are actually quite a few things that are discussed in relation to that and that are also answered, and that's wonderful. When it comes to mental health, once again, I don't know if this surprises you or not, but there's almost nothing written. And that, as a rabbi, surprised me as well, because I'm used to knowing and thinking that when it comes to halacha, everything has been already done, pretty much. In other words, here and there you have a question, but a whole field, an entire field of study that has not been discussed, it's unheard of. How could that be? And yet here we have something that affects tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and absolutely hasn't been discussed. And that's a problem, because we need to have answers for those people. And so 3 years ago, I embarked upon a journey through which I was looking into this topic in order to understand it better, to understand what needs to be learned about this, what holes still need to be filled. And this process had two parts to it. One part was the halachic side. I started learning from the sources throughout to contemporary psak, those things that need to be learned in order to answer questions. And I also started sitting with a psychiatrist friend of mine for an hour a week to learn the psychiatric side of things. And I've been learning with him for 3 years. I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a degree. And I'm guessing maybe some of the people who are on this year maybe do. I know my limitations. But I also know that I would not have been able to write the book that I have written, haven't published yet, without having an understanding of the issues at the basis of psychiatry today. And everything I'm going to say today is based on those sittings that I had for over 3 years with my friend Dr. Harris in Jerusalem, who we really sat for many, many hours. And he gave me also things to read, and Baruch Hashem, I achieved some level of proficiency in the issues. You don't have to worry, I'm not going to diagnose anyone anytime soon, but enough to write the book. So, okay, what I learned was, and in relation to this shir anyway, and this is maybe the most important thing that we're going to talk about today, is that integrating halacha and mental health is very difficult. It's actually quite difficult, because the kinds of things that mental health discusses today and the methodology that halacha uses, they're very, very different. They're very, very different. And in order to explain that, I need to give a little bit of an introduction, okay? So let me give you a short introduction about the development of psychiatric study, research, and diagnosis, so that you'll understand where we stand today and why it is that supplying halachic guidelines becomes very, very complicated. Okay, so at the beginning, right, perhaps you know there's something called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that is used as kind of like the Bible, you might say, for psychiatrists and psychologists. When they come into the field and to try and figure out, what a person has. So the DSM is frequently used. The DSM right now is in its 5th edition, DSM-5, which implies, of course, that there were editions that came first, right? Those editions were very different than the one that is here now. The major difference happened in DSM-3. And let me explain more or less what the difference is, okay? DSMs 1 and 2 that were written from, let's call it an essentialist perspective. So in other words, I'm not giving an exact diagnosis. Yes, just to kind of like give an example, right? So I would say, oh, you know why you're depressed? Because your mother, when you were a child, did so and so and so to you, or your father did this and this and that, and that's why you have depression or borderline personality disorder or this or that or the other, right? That's an essentialist position. It's hard to prove, and it's hard to quantify, right? You notice that that's so, right? It's an essentialist position. It talks about the essential reasons, the causes for why it is that you are going through what you're going through right now, okay? So the first DSMs try to do that. They talked about concepts and philosophies and theories, and they tried to really kind of like explain to you, like kind of like in a Freudian manner, what it is that has brought you to the situation where you're at today. Now, for obvious reasons, the world of medicine didn't take this very seriously. Did not take this very seriously, because you can't work with that. What are you going to do? How are you going to apply that to the next person? See, the beauty of Western medicine is that I can give all the people with certain symptoms a certain medication, and then they're better, right? I'll give everybody Acamol, or whatever you call it by you, yeah? Painkillers, right? So you can give, and they will have the same effect. That's the beauty of Western medicine, is that, yes, I have to listen to every patient individually, but if he ticks certain boxes, then I can say, you know what's going to help you? It's going to be this. I'm going to give you that. That's going to work for you, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, with a system like that in place in Western medicine, the DSM, with its more, once again, I call it an essentialist view of things, didn't really inspire a lot of confidence, and therefore was almost not used in a serious manner by clinicians. What happened in DSM-3 was no less than a revolution. The person who put together, I forget his name, the person who put together DSM-3 basically decided that he's changing the entire field. And of course, he was supported by research and by other individuals, right? It wasn't just one person who decided this, but they basically went on an entirely different model. They wanted to be more accepted by the medical establishment. And so instead of describing causes, instead of writing causes, they described the illnesses and disorders. So they would say, depression, I'll tell you what depression is. Here are 9 symptoms that a person who's depressed might have. Check how many of these you have. If you have between 1 and 3, no big deal. Between 3 and 5, maybe you have mild. Between 5 and 7, maybe you have something more severe. You have 7 to 9, oh, that's really bad. In other words, we're checking boxes now. Now, it's a little bit strange to do it that way, right? I don't know if you all understand that it's a little bit strange to do it that way, but it's a little bit strange. We've gotten used to it, but it's a little bit strange, because imagine a symphony, okay, that's being played. And I think that the beauty of the symphony is experienced, right? But if you look at a page with notes, it's not that the notes don't express the symphony. They do in some way, right? They're what's called a quantitative corollary. In other words, they correlate the note, the music, in a quantitative way. I can write it down so that everyone can understand. Anyone who reads notes can understand it. Yeah. But are the notes the music? Not exactly. The notes are not the music. The music is something experiential that you go through. The notes are just what you can write on a page to try and express to the person playing the violin what I want him to play at any given moment. So you understand the difference between the quantity and the quality. The notes are a quantity. The music is quality. It's the same thing with the difference between physical and mental health. When a person is bleeding, that may be quantitatively, maybe you can quantify that. You can say, oh, there's blood, I need to stop that. I need to do something for that. Fine. When a person is depressed, it's hard to quantify that, right? I mean, we've done it. I'm not saying we haven't done it. We've done it the same way we've done it with music. But once again, I'm sure that you'll agree that the notes aren't music. And in the same way, a list of symptoms is not really the same as the depression itself. The depression is something qualitative that the person is going through. But in order to make the system usable, we've quantified it. Everything that is mental health related is definitely not really quantifiable. It's qualitative. It's an individual feeling that the person has. And as a result, it's also very difficult for us to always relate to it, to see what it is, right? Oh, I'm depressed. You look fine to me, but I don't feel fine. You're walking around, aren't you? You've gone to shul. You've done what you need to do. You're with us. What's the big deal? What's the problem? No, I'm not well at all. Well, I don't see anything wrong. Okay. I guess if the guy was in a wheelchair because he can't use his legs, then we'd say, oh, I can see exactly what's wrong with you. Well, that's the thing, is that's easy to quantify. Physical illness is easy to quantify, but mental illness is harder to quantify. Okay, now that we've understood that, let's go back to the DSM. They did quantify, even though it's difficult to do. The DSM did it. It took every single disorder and quantified it and gave you ways for you to relate to it in a way that you can then categorize and make, and put everyone in boxes. You have OCD, you have personality disorder, you have psychosis, you have depression, you have Asperger's, you have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do I know? Because you fulfilled a certain amount of criteria. Okay, that definitely gave mental health a boost in the medical world. Suddenly it was something that you could relate to. Suddenly it was something that you could understand. That when someone gave you a diagnosis, you understood what it meant. You understood which boxes were ticked, or some of which boxes were ticked anyway. You understood what it means because there are numbers attached to it now. There is something that you can really apply across the board. And that was, like, in a sense, the beauty of it. Sorry. In a sense, it was the beauty of it. Okay. That general trend continued in DSM-4, and it continued all the way to DSM-5. But here's the thing. Here's what I want you to understand, is that it continued to grow and expand. It's important for you to realize this, that the amounts of illnesses or disorders that are identified in DSM-5 have grown. The amount has grown. I don't want to say the word exponentially because it may not be true, but I mean, certainly it's exponential from DSM-1. But the point is, it's grown significantly. Okay, they keep on adding more diagnoses, more and more and more, because it's popular to diagnose. In other words, it's a popular thing to have diagnoses, to have clear readings on what's going on. People want to be able to quantify. It's good to do. But beyond that, beyond the kind of like the draw and quantification, not only that has happened, the movement has been towards a kind of like a view of the spectrum. We've heard probably this word being used in mental illness, mental health contexts, spectrum, okay? The word spectrum is a dangerous word, to be honest, okay? Why? Not because it's not ever true. Maybe it is true. But the moment you use the word spectrum, what you're basically saying is we're all a little bit sick. And that is a dangerous thing to say, because I don't think we are, right? I remember sitting with my friend, Dr. Harris, and asking him, everyone, like, people say about me that I'm a little bit weird, right? Maybe I have some problems. So he said to me, first of all, you probably are, but that's not the point. The point is that it's what he called the bell curve, right? How do we know who's normal and who's not normal? How do we know? The answer is we're all a little bit out there, right? To some extent. And the way we figure out who's normal is the bell curve. Let's talk about those who are kind of like really, extra special, don't fit into society. And then the guys who are a little bit, on the bottom, they have some issues, but more or less they can handle themselves and society accepts them and they fit in. So then those people aren't considered to be suffering from an illness or a disorder. But once again, what does that mean? If we say that, right? If we talk about a spectrum, everybody's on the spectrum, right? So do I have OCD? I guess you could possibly find something in my life where I act a little bit like someone with OCD. So would you say I have a little bit of OCD? I guess you could say that. But once again, do we want to make everybody sick? Do we want to say that about everybody? That's a very challenging thing, okay, to say. And mental health is going a little bit in that direction. And as a result, of course, there are many people who criticize mental health as a result of that. They criticize and say, you're overdiagnosing, right? I think that people feel that way about ADD, ADHD, that sort of thing. People say, oh, everybody takes Ritalin today, I think there's a feeling, once again, I don't know if it's justified or not justified, it doesn't matter right now. But I think there's a feeling that there's a little bit of overdiagnosing when it comes to ADHD, for example. Okay, not everybody has it. Sometimes it's just a little bit difficult for the kid to sit in class. Doesn't mean he has a problem, right? But once again, how did that happen? It happens because everybody's on the spectrum. Some people are a bit more on the spectrum, some people a bit less on the spectrum. Okay, I think you get the point. All that was to explain to you a little bit about the trends that psychiatry has been going in over time. This is to some extent incompatible with halacha. Why is this incompatible with halacha? Because halacha, first of all, doesn't see people as being on the spectrum in that sense. In other words, there are people who are well, and there are people who are unwell. The unwell people, right, need help, need assistance. The people who are well do not need assistance. The people who are unwell will need leniencies sometimes for certain halachas, for certain halachic cases. The people who are well should not enjoy those leniencies. Yeah. A question that was asked about the fast that's happening tomorrow, 17th of Tammuz, right? Should people who are suffering from the coronavirus fast? So my answer is no. Should people who are in quarantine fast? They don't have the coronavirus as far as they know, but they're in quarantine because maybe they were around someone who does. So there's been a whole discussion here in Israel between different rabbis about that. But once again, right, we don't want to give a leniency for those who should fast. We do want to give a leniency to those who need it. We don't want to tell someone who shouldn't fast that he should, and we don't want to do the opposite. We don't want to tell someone that should fast that he shouldn't. And that's a challenge, right? To know what to do in the specific situation. And therefore, to just say, well, everybody's on the spectrum, just accept that as a mantra, right, is not good from a halachic perspective. You can't really do that. You can't say that. I want to know in what way you're unwell, in what way, you want a leniency, right? Sometimes an example, a simple example, which is not about mental health, because homosexuality is not in the DSM-5. So I don't want you to think I'm giving this as an example of mental illness or disorders. I'm not going into that. But many times we see from the homosexual community, a similar sort of dilemma, because on the one hand, when I speak to people who are religious homosexuals and they come to me with their issues and their problems, and of course I want to help, it's like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the claim of the Orthodox homosexual community is that homosexuality is not a mental illness, is not an illness at all, right? And therefore they should be treated like anybody else. And on the other hand, I am asked as a rabbi to give leniencies to many issues that they are going through, as if they are sick or unwell, or the kind of leniencies that I'm asked for are very significant. Yeah. So I would usually give those leniencies to someone who was very much suffering and unwell. But the person would say, I'm not suffering, I'm normal like you. Yeah. And yet I want you to change this and that and the other, right? It's a challenge, right? In that situation to have both. It's a double-edged sword. So, but you want to hold on to both sides. You want to be deemed unwell and yet also well at the same time. And that's a challenge as a posek and a rabbi to deal with things like that. It's the same with mental illness, right? You want to help. Helping, what is helping? Is helping saying that indeed everybody is unwell? Or is helping saying, let's be clear about who's well and who's unwell? Yeah. Let's say that up to here, I consider that to be unwell. And from here on, I would say unwell. And then I could apply certain leniencies in certain situations to the person involved. And that's complex. Okay? And so, like I said, the trend of mental health going one way, the halacha, though, needs to make clear boundary lines about who is well and who is unwell. Now let's take an example of that, okay? Where you'll see this very, very clearly, okay? Because I think a lot of people say, oh, we should be lenient, right? The rabbis should be lenient, should lean towards allowing, for more people maybe to be considered unwell. I mean, do we really want that? Not always, not always. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I'll give you a classic example, and you'll understand immediately, right? So, for example, okay, someone who is suffering from autism or intellectual disability on some level, okay? The parents come and they want to do a bar mitzvah. They want their son to read from the Torah. So immediately you see the issue here, right? In other words, should I be considering this individual, the child, to be unfit or fit? The parents want me to deem him fit, not unfit, right? The child has autism, so what? So what? Why should he be lesser than any other child? Why should he not be able to be a chazan before the Amud for the congregation or read from the Torah? Why should he not be able to exempt others? And helping is to say that he's well, to say that as far as the halacha is concerned, he's not sick. He has challenges, but he's not beyond a bar chiyuva, someone who is obligated in keeping the halacha and doing what other people can do as well. You want to retain that status. You don't want to give it up. Once again, if I gave up that status, if I said the child is beyond, then that would mean all kinds of leniencies for him on the flip side, right? On breaking Shabbos for him, maybe on all kinds of things, that I could maybe allow because he's not a bar dat. He doesn't have, the proper mental capacity, to be obligated and to do all kinds of things. So we can allow all kinds of things on his behalf. But is that what we want? Most people wouldn't want that. They want to be part of the community. They want their child to be part of the community, to be just the same as everybody else. And so we have to, in a sense, say, look, I don't know what the therapist told you. In other words, the therapist says he has autism. I accept that. But you're asking me halachically whether that means that I consider him to be deficient from a halachic perspective. The answer is no. The halacha here will say something maybe depending on the situation. Yeah, I'm not saying all kids, depending on the situation. But my point is that the halacha here will deny, in a sense, that category that has been put on the child, right? Not completely, not in the sense that I'm saying he doesn't have autism. Of course he does. Yeah, if a therapist says he does, he does. But what does that mean to me as a halachic persona? Nothing in this case, because I'm saying, so what? So what? So he has it. He can still do everything that other kids can do. So I'm ignoring that designation as far as I'm concerned. So my point is that the halacha here does not always intersect well with the medical opinion that is given. Or rather, it evaluates the medical opinion on its own terms, on its own halachic terms, and decides whether it's relevant or irrelevant. So we need to be careful with that. That's kind of my point. We need to be careful with that. The intersection is not easy. It's not simple. It needs to be evaluated and seen what's also best for the person. Okay, and I'll give another example of a situation where I would not be lenient. And here, also, in order to help the person, okay? For example, if someone comes and says he's suffering from depression, right? And he has trouble getting up for minyan in the morning. So if you're asking me, putting aside any medical knowledge that I might have, just the question of whether someone who is suffering from depression might be exempted from davening. The simple, let's call it black and white, in a vacuum, right? The answer is yes. I could make a case for that. I could make a halachic case to exempt someone in that situation. Absolutely. But do I want to? I remember when I first spoke to my friend Dr. Harris about it, and a few other therapists as well. Many of them said, no, what are you doing? Absolutely not. Don't exempt him. That's the worst thing you can do for the person. That a lot of times, the person needs goals. Shul could be a wonderful thing for such a person. A goal to attain, something to go to, something to be part of. It's something that he needs to do, get up in the morning for. Once again, you have to know the person and the case. I'm not saying all cases. Some cases, he's too far gone. He just needs to be able to not have that guilt that, oh, he's not going to minyan. He just needs to be able to stay in bed and get up when he needs to get up, etc., depending on the situation. But in many situations, the rabbi here can do damage if he simply accepts the diagnosis in the sense that it tells him, oh, this person is sick, I need to be lenient for him. No. If you're really listening and you're really aware of the material and you do the right thing and talk to the therapist, right? Or ask the patient to ask the therapist on your behalf, whatever, what is the best thing for this individual, then you'll know that the answer is exactly the opposite of what you're thinking of doing. It's not to be nice to him, so to speak, be lenient, tell him, oh, it's okay, don't worry, you don't have to go to shul, it's fine. It's the opposite. You want to help this individual? So treat him as if he's okay. This will help you. Do this. You're not exempt. I don't accept it. Yeah, you need to go. And then if the rabbi is working together with the therapist in order to create the optimal kind of like scenario, then that's what will happen. If the rabbi is working alone without some sort of cooperation on the medical side, then, meaning to understand the medical side, then of course he's going to give him the wrong answer. So we need to be very careful. Sometimes people meaning sometimes the halachic answer is to indeed recognize the, so to speak, sick status, the unwell status of the individual, and sometimes it's not. And it really depends on the situation and the scenario. And that's another thing that we need to understand. And this is the third thing, maybe the last thing that I'll say for tonight. I don't mind talking more, but I'll try to finish it by 8:45 to give people time for questions. If not, I can speak more. It's really up to you. I'm a rabbi. We know how to speak for us, as long as you'll want to hear us, really. So the last thing that I'll mention is, I remember when I first started speaking to therapists, and I've spoken to many dozens of therapists over the years about halacha and mental health questions. And I remember asking, at the beginning, I would ask questions. And the answer that I got from therapists was always the same answer. Every question I asked. The answer was, every case is different. Every case is different. I had to learn a new language, a new halachic language of how to ask questions about mental health, because I was getting absolutely nowhere in the way that I began asking. I would say, let's say someone is suffering from agoraphobia. Let's say someone's suffering from borderline personality disorder. Are they in danger? Can I break Shabbos for that? And the therapist would look at me and say, that's not a good question. You can't. What are the symptoms? What's the history? What's going on with this person? It was like a whole list of things that I needed to provide for the person to answer me. It's not that those kinds of questions aren't asked sometimes with physical health too, because they are sometimes, but it's more with mental health that you see that. It's a very personal answer for every single case. And halacha likes to quantify as well. Halacha likes to like give like answers, like, oh, if the case is this, then the answer is such. Case is X, the answer is Y. Case is A, the answer is B. That's what we like. That's halacha likes to quantify things and to give clear answers. How much matzah should I eat? You eat a kazayit matzah. Oh, what's a kazayit? Anyway, but what are the arba minim? What are the 4 things that you take on Sukkot? Trog, lulav, hadas, arava. Great. Now we know what they are. We can take them. It's very, very clear. By the way, when things aren't as clear, we get a little mushed up, right? Like with davening, meaning, did you have kavana in davening? Oh my gosh, what the heck is kavana? What does that even mean? Yeah, what are we talking about? When halacha leaves things vague, we all get confused. Yeah, that's why it's good that we always complain about the text of the tefillah, right? Oh, it's the same text, it's monotonous. What would you do without the text? I don't know what you would do. Yeah, you would probably get all confused about, you'd come to shul and you'd be like, what do I do now? Yeah. So it's true, we do complain about the text. It is monotonous and repetitive, but honestly, without it, I don't know what we would do. Anyway, so the point is we like quantity. Yeah. And therefore, when it came to translating mental health into halachic language, I honestly had to come up with kind of like a different language to speak, a different way to ask questions and discuss situations that would, on the one hand, be specific enough that it is tailored to the case, and on the other hand, expressive enough of the general rule so that we can learn from that to other cases. And that wasn't simple to do. It took a long time. But slowly but surely, I realized how to do that and how to put it together. So these, bottom line, I'm summarizing, these two disciplines, halacha on the one hand and mental health on the other, are far from being easy to join, are far from being easy to reconcile. They definitely intersect in many places, and people really need answers to these things. They really do. I have a steady stream of calls and questions that come to me now, and it's very, 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 very needed, but it's not easy to do. And I'm sure that when I eventually do get, Corona has put a stop to things, but I'm sure that when I do get to publishing the book that I've written on the topic, there'll be a lot of criticism, because when you write the first of really anything, you're bound to make mistakes, and you're also bound to receive criticism, and that's legitimate and fine. And I'm sure that part of the criticism will be that the cases maybe weren't exactly defined properly, and that the applications are unclear, and this and that. And it's really, like I said, it's like learning a new language and understanding how to apply it. It will take some time, but I really do believe that this intersection is long overdue. And so, Bezrat Hashem, through these kinds of classes and other things, we're going to get the word out there, and we're going to be able to really make a change, significant change, I think, in people's lives, both in terms of the rabbis who are answering questions and in terms of the people who need those answers.
Okay, thank you very much, Roy Rosensweig. That's a very important introduction for us, and hopefully you will be able to publish your book.
I will.
What I'd like to do now is open the floor to questions. First, I'll see if there's anyone who's using the raise hand function. Another way to ask a question is to send me a chat. Send me a text using the chat function. That is open. You could send it to everyone, or you could send it just to me, and I'll read it to Rabbi Rosensweig. Or you could raise your hand on the screen and ask a question. Ask a question that way. So, any questions? I'm looking at the chat. Doreen Lerner.
Very clear, so it's good.
Okay, go ahead, Doreen.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosensweig. That was really very interesting. I look forward to hearing more from you and hopefully seeing your book before long. I'm a psychologist, and what you were saying about the individual who says, I'm depressed, do I have to go to shul? Do I have to daven in the morning? That really hit home with me, because in the past, I've had people who are mildly to moderately depressed who have asked me to support their application to go on disability. In other words, to receive disability benefits and not go to work. And my response over the years of experience that I've gained, I have come to realize that for the mild to moderately depressed person, actually going to work is much better for that person than sitting at home brooding on their problems. So for the severely depressed person, I will say, well, if you are too sick to go to work, then you need to go to an intensive outpatient program where you go every day and you'll get better much faster. But for the other category of depressed patient, mild to moderate depressed, going to work is the best thing for that person. So what you were saying about the depressed person and shul and the other requirements of religious life really struck a chord with me. Right.
And the thing that I worry the most about is that, like I said before, that rabbis will unwittingly, you know, make problems for the healing process by challenging the words of the therapist and telling the person, no, you don't have to, you don't have to. And then the person goes back to the therapist and says, but my rabbi says that I don't have to do X and Y and Z. And the therapist says, yeah, but it's good for you to do X and Y and Z, you know, et cetera. And that's exactly why I think it's very important that there's, you know, some sort of, you know, cooperation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. That was fascinating. Thank you. Now I know everyone who complains that Minyan is too early in the morning, I'm going to send them to talk to you.
Okay. Please do. Thank you.
All right. You'll shake them up a little bit. Okay. Any other questions? I'm looking on the chat and I'm looking. Okay. I have a question. So the whole Corona pandemic has brought on many questions related to mental health. Just today, for example, we're seeing on Facebook now a ruling from Rav Hershel Schachter, normally starting tomorrow in this period of time where we don't listen to live music, the 3 weeks. And Rav Hershel Schachter has noted that if the shut-in, the quarantine, and the whole pandemic is making people anxious, I don't even think he required a diagnosis, then certainly someone would be able to listen to music during this period of time. So maybe you could share with us one or two pandemic-related questions and how you see the integration between halacha and mental health, and how you dealt with some of those questions.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, this period of time definitely provides us with a lot of things, even without the corona, but certainly considering the coronavirus, without a doubt, there are several things that come up. But let's talk about what's closest to us now, right? So, for example, the 2 fasts that are coming up tomorrow, 17th of Tammuz, and then later on the 9th of Av. I mean, both of those fasts, right, for someone, let's say, suffering from anorexia, are almost for sure, right, they should not fast. I mean, 99% of cases, right, I would say should not fast. By the way, with anorexia, it's important to understand what I'm talking about. I mean, I know the term is well known, but anorexia could be obviously those who are unwell physically, right, meaning they're in danger physically, should not fast. Even those who are at the moment not in the danger zone physically, but are still unbalanced in their heads. I can't go into that right now, what that means, but those who still, are unwell, they also should not fast. But even those individuals who have been balanced for years and years, okay, let's say they say, oh, I haven't had a relapse in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and I'm eating in a balanced way, and I go to even those individuals, I would say 9 times out of 10, unless it's a specific case, they should not fast, because it could easily lead to a deterioration for those individuals. And I always say, for those with anorexia, they have to ask a shaila to fast, not the opposite. In other words, some people usually ask a shaila, can I not fast, right? Am I not supposed to fast? It's the opposite. If you have anorexia, you should assume you're not fasting. Now, you want to fast, ask a shaila. And the rabbi will talk to the therapist, and God willing, if they think everything's okay, then fine. But otherwise, no, you don't fast. Now, with regards to this period of time, regarding people who are suffering from depression, then first of all, could be that the entire period, even without coronavirus, but certainly with coronavirus, the fact that this period of time gets people down sometimes because of the different customs that we have. For those who are suffering from depression, and the therapist or they believe that observing these customs, not listening to music and all kinds of other things that people do, that will eventually lead to a deterioration of some sort in their depression, clearly they don't have to keep the laws of these days. Anything that will get the person down does not need to be observed. These are all minhagim, these are all customs. I'm not, of course, saying the customs are not important, but when it comes to someone's mental health, the mental health is definitely more important. So therefore, when it comes to those things, certainly the 3 weeks, it's not an issue. Even the 9 days, we're talking about customs at the end of the day, most of them, and that, of course, does not need to be observed. With regards to fasts themselves, each case is different, but once again, if the deterioration could be significant for a person with depression, we would tell him not to fast. Like any chole she'en bo sakana, any person who's a chole, who is in a significantly unwell, we will tell him not to fast. So definitely those who are suffering during these times need to be wary of that, and not to be extra stringent upon themselves in a way that will eventually be to their detriment. So that's definitely very important to realize. Specifically with regards to coronavirus, yes, also that I would say people who have been separated from their family for a long time, people who have been quarantined, who can't see, other individuals who are feeling very lonely, anything like that. I would say yes, it would be the same thing. They could definitely do what they need to do to kind of like keep their spirits up. There's a difference between being happy and not being sad. Yeah. So I'm not saying, obviously, in this time we're supposed to also remember the mikdash and all that stuff. But once again, if it's really harming your day to day in a significant way, then of course you need to take the edge off, so to speak. That sadness with whatever it takes, whatever you need to do, and one should not feel bad. Part of the point of this book that I'm writing, and part of the point of giving these shiurim, is that what I found is people are usually worried about asking questions that have to do with mental illness, and then they either feel bad that they didn't ask, feel bad about the fact that they were too stringent, or feel bad they were too lenient with themselves. I don't think anyone should be beating themselves up spiritually for what they're doing, for the leniencies that they apply to their lives. If the leniency is right, then you should do it. And don't feel bad like, oh, I'm letting God down. You're not letting anyone down. You'd be letting God down if you didn't follow the leniency, if you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You need to take care of yourself. And mental health is just as important as physical health, sometimes even more important. So therefore, you need to take care of yourself, and you need to allow yourself to do whatever needs to be done in order to care for that health.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I'll just make a closing comment and remind everyone about next week's class. I will tell you that I think Rosensweig, the first time, maybe one of the first tshuvot that I saw that really dug deep into an issue of mental health was the tshuva from your Rebbe, Rabinovich, in Siach Nachum, about whether or not a social worker or a psychologist or psychiatrist can travel on Shabbos to the scene of a terror attack.
Right.
So obviously the paramedics and the doctors can go, and of course he ruled yes, and that was I think that was he was an early adopter, I think, on that in understanding mental health, right, and how it has to play a role. Right. So I want to thank you very much, Rabbi Rosensweig, for joining us for this week and for next week and the week after. I want to remind everyone that next week, same time at 12 o'clock, July 15th, we will talk about synagogue policies and mental health challenges. And the week after that is how Halacha can help battle the stigma of mental illness. I want to thank our sponsors, Tali and Avi Tesler, who sponsored this series in memory of Dr. Eli Simon. I want to thank Mark Simon, Eli's brother, for joining this class. And of course, you're more than welcome to join the others as well. I want to thank all of you for participating. I have a recording of it. If you'd like a recording of it, please let me know. And I want to thank you again, Rabbi Rosensweig, and I look forward to seeing you and seeing everyone else next week. Everyone should have an easy fast if you're fasting. Don't fast if you're not supposed to fast. And a meaningful period of the 3 weeks. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much.